Crucible. And as you come in and get settled in, just relax. We're in for a great presentation today from Jenna Forster and Greg Stiles talking about the power of neuroscience. We're fired up about that. And Gary, you want to say hi to everybody?
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Coaching Crucible. And we're just so happy to have you here today. And we got a really, really great presentation for you. And I have my notepad and my pen and my computer ready to learn a lot today. I'm going to be educated myself, and this is a great topic. So let's get to it.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It's a very hot topic too. You see this all over the place. You know, in fact, this past week, I don't know if all of you saw what happened with Dan Harris on ABC News, and they're talking about what he went through with his panic attacks and his alpha driving career endeavors, and how meditation really helped save his life in a lot of ways. So that's a big part of this power of neuroscience, but just a piece of it. And fundamentally, Jen and Greg are going to get into a lot of the nuts and bolts, things that I'm really excited to hear, just like you, Gary, in terms of, you know, some of the real fundamental things around neuroscience. They're going to pick up where we left off last month and go into even greater detail with some wonderful exercises as well. So everybody's fired up about this, and I hope you guys are too. If you could give me a show of hands that everybody can hear us and see the screen that says the power of neuroscience on, I just want to make sure we're doing what we need to do. So I see some hands coming up. Everybody can see it. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Look at you guys, all these hands up. I'm so impressed. And one thing we really want to emphasize too, last session was unbelievably great in terms of the number of questions we received and comments. I will be manning the comment board as we go through the session today as Jenna and Greg are presenting. Feel free to make any comments, ask any questions. We're going to leave ample time at the end of this session to address any questions you have. If you want Jen and Greg to hone in on certain things and maybe go a little deeper, we'll have ample opportunity to do that. So jot down the questions as we go through the presentation, put them in the message board, just send them to us. I'll answer as best I can all of them as we go through, and then we'll save some of these questions to the end in our question and answer session. So we want this to be high level of participation, and we want to make sure that we meet your needs. So we're excited again to have everybody here. This is the Coaching Crucible, and we're going to be talking about the power of neuroscience here in a couple of minutes, and it looks like we've got some questions popping up, and I'll just address them as we can. Loud and clear from Ken. Yes, sound and video okay. Thank you so very much. That's helpful to know. We appreciate it. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our presenters today. Jenna Forster and Greg Stiles are both from the Executive Coaching University, and they are, if you didn't join us last session, they're delightful people. They're world-class coaches. They're great teachers. And really, the most important thing is that they really have a servant's heart, and they're here to be of service to all of us today. And I'm looking forward to hearing what they have to say, and it's all about the power of neuroscience and how to put that into application as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Greg to start the presentation, and we are off to the races.
Thank you, Drayton. Thank you so much. Thank you to you and Gary and everyone listening for allowing Jenna and I an opportunity to return today and look over the power of neuroscience part 2. We have a lot of information today. So what I would suggest is, since this presentation will be available on the website later on, you'll have access to it, you can go back to it at your leisure. Try not to get caught up into trying to take notes. Try not to allow your mind to get caught on any particular part of the presentation today. Allow it to flow over you. This is really the 15 or 20 minutes that I will present to you. I will be covering the biology piece. That 15 or 20 minutes, you could study for years and years and years and years. So just allow it to flow over you. If you want to take notes on little pieces that pique your interest, do that. And then, as we talked last time, utilize the knowledge that we have provided you and use the best way of learning, which is to go narrow and deep on those topics. So at this point today, just let this flow over you, enjoy it, and know that this is just the beginning. If there are other things that you want to look at, then move forward from there. Drayton, let's take a look at the outline for today's course is what we're going to look at. And again, the presentation today is going to be fast and furious. So I will initially provide a summary of the more important takeaways from our last class presentation. Then, for the biology of success, I will present material on the brain, and we will, again, with broad brushstrokes, visit the topography of the brain, then move down into the inner workings by focusing on neurons, what they are, how they work, and how knowing how these building blocks of experience work contributes to our becoming increasingly conscious participants in our lives. That's the goal. The goal is to understand this on a biological level so that you can utilize that knowledge to create the results you want. I will then, for the exercise, I will then turn the mic over to Jenna. And Jenna's going to bring us back out of the brain and into the application of the biological knowledge that we talk about today. Jenna will finish with an exercise that brings everything we talk about today to full circle so that you can begin to experience the application of the knowledge in your day-to-day lives. That's what it's all about. Again, knowledge is fantastic, but it really needs to be applied to your lives, your clients' lives, your loved ones' lives, and that's the goal, certainly, of Jenna's piece today. The next slide will move us to summarizing key points from our first presentation last time, a few weeks ago. So looking at summary of Class 1, the main point that Jen and I wanted to impart upon you in Course 1 was just to remind you of some of these very important concepts, because so many of us already know them, but we don't remember them and or we use them infrequently. So the first, we are all built for success. Each of us is biologically designed to create the change necessary to achieve our desired results. The second, we are all driven by our autopilot. Knowledge of how our system works provides each of us the tools needed to live less motivated by habit or our autopilot and more in mindful awareness. We are strongest in mindful awareness. We can create in mindful awareness. If we're not in mindful awareness, we're very likely either in the past or in the future. And those are not action-oriented spaces. And the third, it is vital that we develop the skills needed to balance out our autonomic nervous system. And Jenna talked extensively about this in our first course because it's very important. The autonomic nervous system is the system that's the control center for activities of the organs, the glands, and various other involuntary muscles such as the cardiac and smooth muscles. It's those things that we don't really think about that much. The autonomic nervous system is split into two secondary groupings, and this is important. Number one, the sympathetic nervous system, which prepares the body for action. That's where the fight or flight impulses come from. And number two, the parasympathetic nervous system, which regulates more tranquil activities like secretions within the guts, which most of us don't really have to think about, thank goodness. I don't want to have to think about when my gut should be secreting this or that. That's pretty complicated, and I don't have time probably. In our last class, Jenna took us all through the most effective means of regaining control over our autonomic nervous system, and in particular, the fight or flight response, that sympathetic nervous system grouping. And that is by breathing. When you feel activated or stressed, all it takes is 5 good breaths to short-circuit that automatic response and keep you in the present. So if you have been practicing the breathing exercise that Jenna imparted upon us from the last course, fantastic. Continue to do that. The exercise that Jenna presents today will be a similar experience. And the reason that it's going to be similar is that, again, we want to make sure that we are building strong neural connections. Strong neural connections associated with behaviors that will be positive in nature and have positive outputs, as opposed to bringing so many different exercises to bear that nobody really practices anything. So again, you'll be able to practice this again today, and our hope is, Jenna and I hope, that you take that with you and continue. Each of us has what it takes to become a champion, an expert, or a high performer. The recipe is motivation through thought, experience through action, process and review that experience, and then repeat that. Remember, the deeper the repetition, the greater the gains. The deeper the repetition, the greater the gains. With this next slide, let's begin our exploration of the brain and really move into the biology of how all of us tend to work. All right, so look at this awesome picture of the brain. I love this picture. So let's begin diving into our biological system of success by beginning with this picture of the brain. We're not going to stay here for very long. I just wanted you all to begin understanding this material from the macro view, and then we'll move inward towards the micro. Think of this as using Google Maps. That's basically what we're doing here. We're starting out at 5,000 feet, and then we're going to zoom down to street level. 5,000 feet is looking at the brain in this manner, and then zoom down to the street level is going to be looking at the neurons and how they function. So, as many of you may remember from your schooling, the brain is broken into 4 different lobes, each lobe with a different responsibility regarding our existence. As you can see, we all have a frontal, a parietal, occipital, and temporal lobe. Those are the 4 main lobes, and those are the 4 main groupings. In the next slide, we will take another look at this same diagram, but with a bit more information regarding the general functions of each lobe, so that we can understand that a little bit more. And there it is. So that's the same brain, and yet now we can begin to talk about the different responsibilities that each section has, each lobe has. So we're going to look at this diagram, and we're going to go clockwise. So beginning with the frontal lobe, the light blue lobe there in our diagram. It's called the frontal lobe because it's located at the front of the brain. The frontal lobe is associated with reasoning, motor skills, higher level cognition, and within that higher level cognition are those executive function skills that are so in the helping news these days, those organizing skills. That's where those skills are located in the frontal lobe. And expressive language. At the back of the frontal lobe lies the motor cortex. This area of the brain receives information from other lobes of the brain and utilizes the information gathered to carry out body movements. That's the main responsibility of the frontal lobe. Moving clockwise to your right, the parietal lobe, the yellow section and yellow portion on our diagram. The parietal lobe is located in the middle section of the brain and is associated with processing tactile sensory information such as pressure, touch, and pain. Continuing to move clockwise, the pink section is the occipital lobe, and the occipital lobe is located at the back portion of the brain and is associated with interpreting visual stimuli and information. The primary visual cortex, which receives and interprets information from the retinas of the eyes, is located in the occipital lobe. And moving towards the bottom of the brain and of our diagram here, in the green, is the temporal lobe. The temporal lobe is, again, located on the bottom section of the brain, and it is also the location of the primary auditory cortex, which is important for interpreting sounds and the language we hear. Some of you may remember the hippocampus. The hippocampus is located in this area, and the hippocampus is strongly associated with memories. So therefore, this area of the brain is also associated with the formation of memories. Okay, so that was the 4 lobes of the brain. Again, you can take university courses. you can probably get university degrees and advanced degrees in this. And that was in 2 or 3 minutes. We've just reviewed the 4 lobes that constitute the commonly used way of expressing in broad stroke topography of the brain. That's it for this. Our next slide will help us focus on the actual mechanism of change, which is the neuron. So again, we're going from 5,000. Now we're getting into our little machine and zooming down to street level, to the neuron, which is where the work happens. I love this picture. This is one of my favorite pictures because it does a wonderful job of bringing our focus from the macro brain, from 5,000 feet, and just zooming it right in to street level, from the 4 lobes down into the inner workings, down to the neurons. The cutaway at the top right of the picture is a wonderful representation of the activity constantly occurring on the neural level. Notice the red dots. They represent the information coming into and going out of that specific neuron. And notice the activated glow of the cell body. Our brains are amazing structures of never-ending activity. In our next slide, we'll take a look at a picture of an actual neuron and learn more about this wonderful and amazing mechanism of change. This is also one of my favorite slides. If I was looking at it from afar and I had no idea what this presentation was about, I would think that this was potentially a grove of trees. But in actuality, what it is you have a very strong, heavily used neuron in the front, and you have the other less used neurons in the back. Notice the neuron in the foreground. Notice the circumference of the main trunk of that tree. Notice the branches reaching out to other neurons, with some almost looking close enough to touch on the lower left and on the right, with what look like budding branches at the ends. Again, they look like trees. What you see here in picture form is a wonderful physical example of a neuron connected with a behavior or process that the brain's owner engaged in more frequently than those associated with the smaller neurons. Recall from our last presentation that continued practice, and I referred to it as deep practice, is how we change behavior. It's how we change ourselves. And this picture shows why. The neuron with the larger trunk and greater branches is one associated with a stronger action, whatever that action may be. This neuron is what we are shooting for when we help others to reach their desired state, when we help others to move from one behavior to another. Okay, now let's identify some of the parts of the neuron with the next slide. We'll zoom in a little bit more so that we have a better understanding of what we're actually talking about here. Here we have 2 different views of a neuron and its parts. The artist's representation provides you a clear view, I think, which you can compare then to the actual neuron on the right. As we identified in the previous slide, the big trunk-like structure pictured on the right is called the axon, A-X-O-N, which sends out information from the neuron body, from that cell body. The branches coming off the axon are called dendrites, which bring information into the neuron, which you can see in the artist's representation very well. At the end of each dendrite are bulbs that secrete electrochemical substances the neurons use to communicate to one another. There is a space between dendrites of different neurons, and it's called the synapse. And you can see that beautifully in the artist's representation on the left. The way I think of the synapse is similar to the English Channel between Great Britain and France. Neurons communicate through the electrochemical substances floating over the synapse. The receiving neuron takes in the new information and speeds it along the dendrite to the axon, to the cell body, and then repeats that whole process. So you've got Great Britain on the top of that picture, and you've got France on the bottom. And Great Britain wants to communicate with France. So Great Britain secretes electrochemical substances into the so-called English Channel. They float in that English Channel, and receptors on the French side gather that in, and they transition that from that electrochemical substance to an electrical impulse, which then moves through the dendrites to the axon to the cell body. It activates, and then it does it all over again. It's an amazing system of information processing, sharing, and giving. Each axon is covered in a biologic insulator that I equivalent to electrical tape, just because it's easier for me to understand and think about it that way. It's called the myelin sheath, and it grows in thickness based upon use. The thicker the myelin, the quicker messages are moved along. Thus, as you look at our picture on the right, the neuron in the foreground had a much thicker myelin sheath, allowing it to communicate quicker than the other neurons, and thus ensuring its survival. Communication ensures survival because the quicker the message moves through, that's the behavior, that's the action that will be taken. The goal of every neuron is to grow as many axons, dendrites, and bulbs as possible, and then create connections with other neurons. This then creates that underlying substructure we've talked about before. The greater interconnectedness among neurons, the stronger the ability and behavior we utilize as the top-end user. We are able to continue to grow new neural connections throughout our lifetime. It used to be thought that it ended at a certain period of time, that essentially we could not grow anything new. We were basically stuck with what we had. That's no longer the case, and this theory is called neuroplasticity. The brain reacts to new experiences or injuries by creating new neural pathways throughout our lives. Those neural pathways that get the most action remain strong and resilient, while those pathways that see diminished activity are reabsorbed into the system or repurposed, and this process is called pruning. Neurons must have a purpose to survive. That's how they live, is by having a purpose. So the old saying, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, is just not correct. It actually, the saying should be, old dogs can learn many new tricks. They just got to practice it the right way. But they can always create new neural connections, which leads to new behaviors. The next slide is going to help us see how a cell body grows throughout the learning process, because that's what we're talking about here. In behavior change is learning. Approaching your mate in a different way is learning a different way to approach your mate. Being a different leader is learning different behaviors, learning different skills to be a different leader. You must learn new things to supplant the old. So the concept of learning is so important for what we're talking about today. This slide is a beautiful visual presentation of the process of learning. Notice how the neuron begins with just a cell body, then begins to grow an axon, which then begins to grow dendrites. The more often this cell body is called upon into action, the larger the axon becomes. Remember that trunk, that's the largest piece. And the more and more dendrites it creates to interconnect with other neurons. Additionally, the more action the neuron receives, the thicker the myelin sheath becomes, speeding up its ability to communicate, leading to increasing importance within that specific neural system. As we learn, remember, the recipe, and this is stated a little differently, but it's a little bit more precise. The recipe for learning, and thus change, is experience, practice, process, and then repeat. Experience, practice, process, then repeat. So as we learn, specific dendrites grow so that specific neurons will connect at specific synaptic points so that greater and greater neural systems can be created, leading to increased learning, growth, change, or expertise. Think of a very complicated and intricate root system. And that's what it looks like, and that's how it works. Like neurons attached to like neurons, and there's this ongoing dance between neurons that attempt to link up with other neurons that have a similar action or a similar reason for being, so that then they can be utilized more, which allows them to continue to grow and continue to move forward. The more we grow, the more we know. And the more we know, the more we grow. All right, this next slide will conclude my portion, and then we're going to transition it over to Jenna for the practical side of everything that we've talked about today. All right, everybody take a deep breath. What I just reviewed is the biological process of bringing a thought into action and moving that action into habit in a conscious manner. Remember, what we just reviewed is the physical creation process of success. As the slide here suggests, thought is action and rehearsal. Now that you know how and why it works on the physical level, you know what it takes to create new behavior to supplant unwanted behavior, leading to more successful experiences. You now understand what needs to happen on a biological level to help you and your loved ones and your clients to change in the way that they want to learn that new skill. Jenna, I'm going to turn over the mic so you can now guide us away from biology back into the world of applying these thoughts and these concepts.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. That was an impressive amount of information in a very short amount of time, so my hat is off to you, sir. Well done. I love the visuals you used there because they help to show the physiological process that's happening in our brain, how inside our brain is continual movement, that growing, connecting, pruning, and having an understanding that every thought, behavior, and action has a real physical effect on us. It will allow us to create ownership both for ourselves and those we work with when it comes to creating change. I always like to think of knowledge is for the mind and experience is for the body, and our role is to connect the two to get deliberate action to go forward. So let's talk about how this translates in our action and our behaviors. You've seen the physical manifestation of your behavior as that electrochemical connection. Now let's explore it from the other way in. When we think about action, action is about aligning our mind and our body, or in other words, getting our behavior equal to our thoughts or intentions. Remember, last call we talked about the mind and how the mind is your brain in action. As Greg said, every time you learn something new, you make a new neurological connection in your brain. You grow those dendrites like you just saw on the slide. You're doing it right now on this call. Learning is molding synaptic connections. You see, as human beings, we're meant to take our knowledge, what we've learned, and to modify our behavior, change our actions, in order to create new experiences. When you have a new experience, those gangs of neurons, and if we go to the slide with the tree, or the neurons that we saw just a moment ago, we can take a look at this. When you have that experience, you're building those gangs of neurons like you see on the lower left and the lower right hand side of the screen. They begin to organize themselves and to connect. You see those dendrites, they're making those connections, and there's that space between them, but they're firing these what are called neurotransmitters between them, and that's how this is showing up for us physically. And then we move and this becomes a history. So the history of the experience that we're having becomes logged in our brain, specifically in that temporal lobe. So we have the experience, we take everything in with all of our senses, and as we take these things in, we're forming these jungles of neurons to organize and string into place, and the moment they organize into a pattern, the brain releases chemicals. We all classify these chemicals as feelings or emotions. These chemicals are released into our body, and we then take action, or certain behavior is taken. This, what I just described, is how the mind and the brain and the body become connected, and we become one whole being. So let's just say this another way. If we think about feelings and emotions are the end product of experience, so what you learn something new, you make a new connection in your brain. You get your body involved by taking some sort of action. to create a new experience in the brain. Taking it further, if you pay attention to what you're doing and you repeat it over and over again, that deep practice like Greg was speaking to last call, you fire and wire new circuits in your brain. These new circuits manifest in new thoughts, behaviors, and habits. The more you focus on these new thoughts, behaviors, and habits, the more strength is built in that connections, as you see in the picture here. The axon in the middle, strong, thick, able to penetrate the connection easier in that. So the more attention being spent, the more firing is happening in your brain. The more strength is built in the connections that you're forming. If your brain is busy strengthening those connections through thoughts, behaviors, actions, then there's only so much of that neurotransmitter, that chemical that connects through the English channel, like Greg spoke about. There's only so much chemical in your body at the time, in your brain, firing at one time. If you're using it with the new thought, behavior, and action, then that chemical cannot also be used in the old thought, behavior, and action. The old thought, behavior, and action, those old connections, will become pruned away. This is how behavior changes. This is the physical way behavior is established. So it can be said that if you don't learn anything new and you don't do anything differently, the brain stays the same. If the brain stays the same, you stay the same. So many times we hear people stuck. I feel stuck. I feel overwhelmed. I feel stagnant. What is necessary? We need to create some new learning. We need to create some new experiences so that we can create new connections in our brain. We can wire and fire in our brain, and we need to repeat it and repeat it and repeat it in order to gain the strength in that so that our behavior will shift in the direction we're looking for it to shift. I have a really great story that's about a colleague of mine, a dear colleague and a dear friend, and this gentleman is a university professor in Canada, and he's currently moved to China, and he's now teaching at a university in China. And I met with him before he left, and I asked him, how did you end up teaching in China? That's a pretty big shift. And his answer was, it all began with a chai latte. And I said, a chai latte? He said, yes. Knowing information about how experiences are and their effect on us, I realized that things were becoming stagnant in my life. I recognized the little things that were happening. And one example is I recognized that every time I go for my morning coffee, I order the same Americano I've been drinking for the last 15 years. So I decided to create a new experience. I decided to order a different type of coffee every morning from here on out. This started a snowball effect and manifested outward, and he started to pay attention to other things in his life and make different decisions, have different conversations, talk to people he hadn't spoken to before, start anything new and create learning, and he ended up having a conversation that landed him in China, teaching at a university. So the power of experience and in thoughts and creating those experiences is immeasurable when it comes to wiring and firing in our brain. If you want to put that into a work context, example, yesterday I was on a call with a client, and there's a struggle, there's a conflict happening within their organization, and it's basically an individual that's of a newer generation wanting to transform the position that they're in and have it look a little bit more like millennials believe their work life should look. And so there's conflict that's arising. And what you have going on is a conflict in behavior, a conflict in habit and in knowing where each individual currently stands. You have the individual that's 20-something coming in saying, no, I want to work remotely. I want to come in, I'll come in 3 days a week, and all those details that looks like. And you have the leadership of this organization saying, no, this isn't how we run our organization. So if we take it out of the emotion of that and out of that space of headbutting that we can find ourselves in and look at it from a neurological perspective and work individually with each individual to understand what's truly happening and the history of their experience and their current understanding, and how we can create new learning and opportunity here to create new successful outcomes. It's very, very powerful when you bring it into the context of our work and what we do. And if we have two individuals in conflict, enabling them to understand what's truly happening there at a biological level will open up the opportunity for conversation, and it will open up the opportunity to have each individual see things a little bit differently. It can shift perspective, and that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with perspectives. So this can be a very powerful tool to enable that. So I want to take you through, we did an exercise last class, and I want to speak, we'll bring up the slide of the neurons and just take a look at how this works. And Greg did a great job of describing this and how we create some of these changes, and growing dendrites equals learning. So last call that we were on, we practiced a 6-breath series. And as we have learned through these last classes, if we can repeat an experience, we can create a stronger myelin sheath or electrical tape connection. That axon gets very, very strong the more we practice it. So if we can practice this again with the understanding that you are not just breathing, you are not just breathing to balance out your autonomic nervous system, you are also wiring and firing electrical connections in your brain. And this is the power of meditation. So the stages that we're taking you through are the beginning steps of meditation, when we can move into a place of meditation and understanding the strength of meditation in wiring and firing these axons and dendrites so that we are moving aligned with what it is, whether we call it our purpose, our mission, our vision, or where we want to go. We can understand that we are very accountable for the actions that we take, and we're very accountable to the choices that we make every day and how we spend our time and who we spend our time with. So strengthening these connections, strengthening the pace, the thickness, the strength by repeating over and over again is one way that we can build that connection, pruning away any old habitual behavior. So we're going to take you through the process again of the 6-breath series so that we can build these connections and make them stronger and stronger and stronger. So like last time, I'm going to ask you to push yourself away from your desk, whether you're seated or standing. I'm going to ask you to turn off any of your noisemakers, your cell phones, your iPads, your laptops, or whatever you have in front of you. Let's turn off the noise. We're going to take a couple of minutes here, and we're going to build, and we're going to wire and fire some connections in your brain, and we're going to build the strength of those because we're practicing this over and over and over again. So as you sit, feet firmly planted on the floor, body upright, either from your torso up, or if you're standing, solidly standing, we're strong, competent, capable. Close your eyes. And I'm going to take you through the 6-breath series. A reminder of what that is: we're going to breathe in for the count of 6, we're going to hold for the count of 2, and we're going to breathe out for the count of 6. The pace of it will change. I will count it out for you. And as you do that, you can take it a little bit further by picturing a light coming in through the top of your head and filtering through your entire body. And every time you breathe, the light becomes stronger and stronger, and it sinks deeper and deeper through all of your body. So here we go. Breathing in, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Breathing out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Breathing in. Feel the light. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Breathing out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Breathing in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Breathing out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Breathing in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Breathing out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If you want to remain here, by all means. Everyone else, open your eyes and recognize, remember the visuals that we went through, recognize that you just wired and fired an electrical connection in your brain. You slowed down your autonomic nervous system. You slowed down your pace to such a degree that you are opening up opportunity. And that's what we're meant to do. So, Drayton, Gary, let's open it up. If you have anything to add, or if we have any questions from the audience, we'd love to entertain those.
Wow. I wish I could have done the meditation, but I have to man these things. So what a great presentation. And Jen and Greg, the first thing that popped out for me is that this is the missing link. You know, for years and years and years, coaching has been this woo-woo ethereal thing that we have worked with people and done our magic, and now you're bringing the science to this work that brings irrefutable evidence in terms of all these things that we've been working on over the years. Now we understand the biology of it. Now, we just intuitively knew these things for so many years, but now we get the biology, and you guys demonstrated it so well in terms of here's a science, and then here's how you put it into application. And the possibilities, as I see it, for all of us working with our clients, it's endless. If we can help them to slow down and truly physically rewire their brains, the possibilities are out of this world. It boggles my mind. So well done. Just a beautiful representation of this. And I'd love to get questions, all of you out there. What questions do you have? What can Jenna and Greg address that would be helpful for you? Okay, we've got one from, and Gary, go ahead and weigh in while I look at some of these questions.
Yeah, great. I just want to say thank you guys for doing a really great job. The slides really help. It's really great to see pictures of exactly what you're speaking about, and really good job. So I really enjoyed the entire presentation.
And here's a great question from Sarah. Thank you so much. Fascinating content. In your example about applying neuroscience to organizational conflict with a millennial worker, can you walk us through exactly how we would walk them through what's going on in their brains to help them approach the problem differently? Wonderful question.
Absolutely. And the first step to that is to remember that it always starts out as an emotional situation. And as we spoke in our last call, we become addicted to our emotions. As human beings, we become addicted to our emotions. And when you have individuals that are driving individuals, which we could classify as A-type, or any individual that is wanting to move forward at a rapid rate, which was the situation with this. So I have one individual, the leadership, in the leadership team who wants to drive forward. What happens is if we are not aware and we are not in the place of acknowledgement, our bodies end up running the show. So the electrical release that happens that I described between the brain and the body, the electrical signal that's sent out, we feed off of that and we become addicted to that emotion. We become so addicted to that emotion that our behavior exhibits that emotion. So these people, if somebody is classified, this example, the individual is classified as aggressive. And when we shut down from any awareness, our body actually starts to run the show. So instead of a brain down approach, it becomes a body up approach. So we become so addicted to our emotional beings that we react very quickly. We become reactionary human beings. So knowing that about this individual and explaining that process to the individual is very, very important. So this individual is running off of his body, and that happens a lot when you get fast-paced, high energy, high responsibility, all of those sorts of things. People become A-type, they become drivers, they begin to move through. So that's the first recognition that's important for the individual to understand. The other individual, it's important for them to understand that they have habitual ways of communicating and habitual ways of interacting. They are trying to enter into the conversation based on those habitual ways in their behaviors. When you can explain to them how those are created, you explain the process that we just went through in this, the wiring and firing and the history of our experiences, and that's how that's held in our brain, and how our brain goes to those first in order to know how to move forward, you can start to have conversations that are expansive with the individual. So now you've got two people that are thinking about something beyond the emotional conflict they're currently in. So you're drawing them out of the emotional conflict and having them to think about themselves biologically. That will automatically take any emotion out of the situations because now you've brought them back into their mind, their brain. That's the first step. And then you can start to have the appropriate conversations, and these conversations become about culture of organization. They become about the individual and within this context and the individuals that this will affect. So you can have a more logical conversation. So that would be just a quick example of how I would do that.
So speak to the whole awareness piece. So one of the things that we certainly need to help our clients get, and for us as individuals as well, is this awareness. And meditation slows us down so we become more aware. So speak to that. Greg, you want to speak to that just in terms of how we can help people become more aware and slow down?
Absolutely, Drayden. I think that, the first step there is sometimes helping people just recognize that maybe they're moving on autopilot more often than they think they are. Again, the sneaky thing about autopilot is it's auto. We don't think about it. And so in Jenna's example, the conflict comes from people just reacting on old scripts, on old closed mind processes. So the first step to, I think, increasing awareness, so if you're working with a client, the first way of doing that is having the conversation with the client around the behaviors that you're noticing and bringing awareness to them. I can't tell you how many clients I have that, will have 360s or have information from their family or from their friends, and they'll say, I had no idea. I had no idea that people saw me that way or that I was behaving in that manner. So the first thing is opening up that closed loop, because we all have closed loops around the things that we, the behaviors that we engage in, the ways that we treat people. Having that conversation. Once you do that, beginning to teach people, just as Jenna continued to teach us today, very simple, how to breathe. Just breathe. When you notice your fists start clenching up and you're getting angry, just breathe. Right before you go into a meeting, take a few breaths. When your daughter is starting to get on your nerves and you're about to go off the handle, take a few breaths or go walk out of the room. It's building those skills and those tools that then people can, it's an exponential process. Once somebody begins to understand that they're not aware and they bring their awareness to that which they are not aware, they gain more awareness. And as they gain more awareness, they bring in new tools that they then gain more awareness around that. And it continues to build and build and build.
Mm-hmm. A great explanation. And Jenna, I wanted to honor Sarah's response to what you had said. She goes, wow, this is huge. Many thanks for that explanation. I work with many type A's like that, and that approach is a game changer for me. So that's great to hear, Sarah. Thank you so much. And I've got a great question from Gail here. What if you have a problem seeing the light during the meditation and also trying to stop other thoughts?
Yeah, that was a big one for me because I lived in my head a lot, and I was always thinking. And one of the visuals that I use in order to help myself with that is I picture the thoughts being bubbles above my head, and if there's a lot of bubbles above my head, then the light can't get through. So I just picture either the bubbles floating away or even popping, and trusting the process. So meditation and being comfortable with meditation is not an overnight skill. It is something that practice, that deep practice, that practicing, repeat over and over and over again, that will actually build that ability within yourself to do it. Remember, you've wired something. As soon as you do it, you've wired it. You've fired it, you've wired it. It's just not very strong right now. So the more you can repeat the process and trust the process, you will gain that thicker, stronger connection. It will become easier.
And one of the things I think of is it's called the meditation practice. So we're practicing these things, and with practice you get better. So many people that I encounter, they want to meditate one time and think that, you know, there's a light switch that's flicked and you get it all. Well, you don't. I didn't, certainly. And it's various iterations, and I love what you guys said about the practicing piece. It's being consistent and doing this on a daily basis, and things will start to get better and better as you rewire. It's just a matter of practice. I love what Dan said here. He said, this is from Buddha in Blue Jeans. I haven't gotten that book, but we all should. Listen to others. Listening to others affirms them, blesses them, connects you to them, and harmonizes you with them. And that's from Buddha in Blue Jeans, an extremely short Zen guide to sitting quietly and being Buddha. Dan, thank you very much. That's a great line and great suggestion. I'll certainly have to get that book. So what else can you, when we work with our clients, and I'm thinking of the big high-powered A types, and I know we use the term going quiet versus meditation. How should people approach it with these alpha types that if you talk about meditation, they're going to either throw you out of their office or be scared witless? So what would you say in terms of a technique that people can take forward from today in terms of broaching meditation with their clients?
Greg, you want me to take that, or you want to take that?
You can start, Jenna, and then I'll just tag on.
Okay. Yeah, I specialize in A-type. I really enjoy working with A-type individuals. It's just fascinating to me. So I agree with you, Drayton. I would never start working with an individual and go right to meditation, or even breathing for that matter. That takes time, and it also takes a certain amount of trust to be built. A-types tend to work off of faith, so they have to have faith in you, faith in the process, faith in what's happening. So I usually start talking around the situation and helping them work through the situation, bringing in seeds of self-awareness within that. So I would talk about, because they always want to go to the situation and focus on the situation. So go to the situations and then start to plant seeds of their own accountability within that situation. So what they're bringing to that. And basically what you're talking about is you're talking about ego. So they bring in their ego, and this is the bravada that most A-types work under. That's not necessarily who they are. It's this manifestation of years and years and years of knowing that they have to work this way or behave this way in order to be successful. So a lot of conversation for me begins about planting seeds and then moving into conversation around ego and personality and how their personality and behaviors are showing up, and the effect of that. The effect of that for themselves and everything that they're doing. And then we're talking about things like efficiency and how effective they're being. Once they they understand that and they start to take accountability for that, that opens up the door to be able to start talking about, okay, well, why don't you just, before you walk in that meeting, let's just take a couple of breaths. And as soon as we start on that line, then we can keep moving and moving and moving. And most of these individuals, I would say 9 out of 10, end up becoming, they increase their level of spirituality through the process because it opens up that, it's almost an allowance for them. And once they attach into that, then their power, positive power to make a positive difference, is increased enormously.
And I love
Greg,
that because, yeah, go ahead, Greg. Yeah.
Thanks, Drayton. And Jenna, that's beautiful. I think that's very well said. You know, the other things that I would add is, as you're planting seed, one great way of doing it is feeding them articles of other A-types who have gone through different life changes, different experiences, and begin to feed it that way. What I've noticed is that oftentimes if there's a level of distance between the type A person and kind of the information that you're giving them, it provides them an opportunity in that space to kind of decide on their own, and they want to decide things on their own. That's how they're wired. So sometimes feeding them articles on CEOs and other leaders that have come through different things and maybe use meditation, maybe not, but other ways of opening that closed loop. The other thing that I would suggest is I've had good success with really high performers in just presenting them and talking with them about how their brain works and how their body works, and more of the science as opposed to some of the psychological underpinnings or the emotions. They seem to trust that a little bit more, and again, it's a little more distanced. I think that most of, at least the clients that I've worked with, type A's really want, at the end of the day, they really want to understand themselves almost on a mechanical level, because then they have the control to make the changes, and they want to have the control to make the changes of them for themselves. So that's what I would add. Drayton, what would you throw out there as well?
Yeah, I think it takes, you know, it's almost, it's a finessing situation with these clients because of the ego forward and the alpha mindset of these folks. I think back to, you know, when I was in those positions, if somebody would have come to me and said, yeah, let's go meditate and breathe, I would have said, you're out of my office. You know, just get out of here. So it takes a great deal of finesse to get them to that place, and that's what we're talking about here, and you've given us some beautiful tools. Got one more question, and then we'll wrap it up for the day. So how long should a practice session be? That's one of the questions we have.
I'll jump in real quick. Yeah, the duration of the practice session is not the issue. It's the focus of the practice session, and it's the deep focus of the practice session. You can get much more out of sitting and trying to do this meditation for 5 minutes and really focus on it and do it day in and day out and day in and day out, as opposed to sitting for an hour and just having your mind say, this is ridiculous, I can't believe I'm sitting here doing anything. So it's not about the duration of the practice. It's about the focus and the intensity of the practice. And to dovetail on that just a little bit, I think it's really important for everyone to understand, as Jenna said, when you're learning something new, there is no overnight skill build. There's no such thing. If you look out there, the major training programs that deal with high-level performers are all right around 8 weeks to 12 weeks. It takes that long to begin to grow these new neural connections. So be gentle. Be gentle with yourself. Be gentle with your clients, and tell them that this takes practice. Just keep practicing. Trust. Keep practicing, and it will come. And by 8 weeks, 12 weeks, you have a brand new behavior, and they'll be going, wow, that was magic. I can't believe I can do this now, etc. But it takes a while, so be gentle.
I love that. Yeah, absolutely. You know, the driver types we try to judge and we condemn ourselves, and the negative self-talk kicks in. When you commit to a practice like this, don't judge yourself. Give yourself some love and pass that along to your clients, because we all need it. Being respectful of everyone's time. Gary, it's the top of the hour, and let me wrap up too by saying, Jenna and Greg, you did an incredible job. Super helpful. I hope everybody got as much out of this as I did. and we just really appreciate your time and delivering this great information. So thank you very, very much.
Our pleasure.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Oh, it's our pleasure indeed to have you. It's great. And Gary, how would you like to wrap things up today?
Yeah, I'd like to add that thank everybody for being on the call today, and thank you again to Jen and Greg. And Drayton, we have a special surprise for everybody next month. We're going to have a great topic and a lot of fun on next month's call. So I want to remind everybody to please check us out on the website. Please be here next month. Bring your friends. Tell other people around the industry what we're doing in this no sales zone of keeping the dialogue open and bringing new things to coaches all around the world. So be with us again next month for another great coaching crucible.
Yes, yes, and I'll echo that. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you for doing what you do in service to others via coaching, and we look forward to having you all with us this time next month. So until then, Godspeed, and everyone be well. Good night.
Bye, everybody.